The most profound breakthroughs in any missing person case rarely arrive through dramatic police raids or high-pressure interrogations. They don't materialize beneath the blinding lights of television cameras or during tense moments in interview rooms. Instead, they often emerge in complete silence, in ordinary rooms, inside family homes, long after investigators have packed away their equipment, and the news crews have moved on to fresher stories. Long after everyone assumes that every significant piece of evidence has already been discovered and documented. That's where the truth frequently hides, not in obvious places, but in the quiet corners that everyone else has already stopped examining. Months after Nancy Guthrie disappeared from her life in Tucson, Arizona, her family confronted one of the most challenging aspects of any tragedy. It wasn't dealing with law enforcement. It wasn't speaking to journalists. It wasn't even the agonizing wait for news that never seemed to arrive. It was something far more intimate and devastating. The slow, heart-wrenching process of trying to return to some semblance of normal life. That meant sorting through possessions that had remained untouched since the initial investigation. It meant opening drawers that hadn't been opened in months. It meant looking at photographs that brought back memories almost too painful to process. It meant making impossible decisions about what to preserve, what to store away, and what to finally release. If you value documentaries that dig beneath surface-level reporting, that carefully separate verified facts from speculation, that follow evidence wherever it leads, please take a moment to subscribe to this channel. Every week we examine real cases using publicly available information, looking beyond sensational headlines to understand what investigators actually know, what remains unanswered, and why certain questions persist no matter how much time passes. Your subscription costs nothing, but it signals to YouTube that careful, thorough research deserves to be seen and shared with a wider audience. This is a task most grieving families postpone for as long as humanly possible, not because it's physically demanding, because every photograph, every notebook, every unopened box carries emotional weight that's almost impossible to prepare for. Each item tells a story. Each piece of paper holds a fragment of a life that's no longer present. Each object reminds someone of conversations they wish they could have just one more time. For Nancy's son, this wasn't about searching for new evidence. It wasn't about trying to solve the mystery. It was simply about organizing what remained of his mother's existence, deciding what to keep, what to store, and what each item meant to the family she left behind. No one anticipated that this process would raise new questions, but that's precisely what occurred. Concealed inside the lining of an old wooden keepsake box, he discovered something unexpected, a small brass key wrapped in faded yellowed paper, the kind of key that might open a safety deposit box, a storage unit, or perhaps an old piece of furniture. No one in the family recalled seeing it before. There was no label indicating what it opened. There was no accompanying note explaining its significance. And that single discovery prompted investigators to re-examine aspects of Nancy's life that had previously received little attention. This channel exists because of viewers like you who genuinely care about truth and thorough investigation. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button right now. It takes less than 2 seconds, and it tells YouTube that careful research deserves to be seen by more people. Most people say they'll come back later. Most people never do. Don't let that be you. Subscribe now and become part of a community that values facts over rumors. It wasn't the discovery itself that proved so intriguing to investigators. It was what it suggested about Nancy as a person. Because as investigators reviewed documents connected to her life, a different picture began to emerge. Not of someone acting impulsively during her final weeks, but of someone who may have been maintaining careful records over a much longer period. That possibility changes the entire conversation. If true, it suggests Nancy's concerns may not have begun shortly before her disappearance. They may have developed gradually, over months, or even years. That's a vastly different timeline than anyone initially suspected. What you're about to hear isn't simply about one discovery. It's about understanding Nancy Guthrie herself, her habits, her routines, her decisions, and why investigators are now taking another look at the life she quietly lived long before anyone realized something was wrong. Most investigations begin after tragedy occurs. This one may have begun years before anyone knew there was a mystery to solve. That's what makes Nancy Guthrie's story so different from so many other missing persons cases. When people first learned about her disappearance, attention naturally focused on the final weeks of her life. Who did she speak to? Where did she go? Who might have seen her? Investigators, journalists, and thousands of people following the case searched for answers within a relatively narrow window of time. It seemed logical. After all, most investigations start by examining the days leading up to a person's disappearance. But what if the most important chapter wasn't written during those final weeks? What if the answers had been quietly accumulating over years, waiting for someone to notice? That's the possibility investigators have reportedly begun exploring. And if that possibility proves accurate, it changes almost everything. Because instead of seeing Nancy as someone reacting to a sudden crisis, it paints the picture of someone who may have been quietly documenting pieces of her life long before anyone understood why those records mattered. She may have been preparing for something. She may have been protecting herself. She may have been preserving information she believed would one day be important. You're still here, which means you're not looking for quick headlines or sensationalized clickbait. You're someone who wants to understand the full story, follow the evidence, and think critically about what's being presented. That's exactly the kind of person this community is built for. Subscribe and join us. Your subscription helps ensure that careful, thorough investigations like this one continue to reach people who genuinely care about understanding the truth. People often imagine investigations as dramatic moments. Police sirens, search warrants, crime scene tape, television cameras broadcasting live updates. But the reality is usually much quieter. Sometimes the most significant developments don't happen during an active search. They happen months later, when families begin the heartbreaking process of putting a loved one's life back together. Not emotionally. That takes years. But physically, sorting papers, opening drawers, organizing shelves, trying to decide what should be kept and what can finally be packed away. It's a process almost every grieving family eventually faces. Not because they're ready, but because life eventually demands it. Every object tells a story. Every photograph brings back memories that were too painful to revisit until now. Every folder reminds someone of conversations they wish they could have one more time. For Nancy's family, that process reportedly became something else entirely. It became an opportunity to understand her life more completely than anyone had before. It became a chance to see patterns that had previously gone unnoticed. It became the beginning of a new phase in the investigation, one that no one had anticipated. This is the kind of work that takes days, sometimes weeks, of research, fact-checking, writing, and careful analysis before it ever reaches your screen. If you appreciate that effort, the best way to support it is to subscribe. It costs you nothing, it helps the channel grow, and it tells YouTube that this kind of content deserves to be seen by more people. Don't wait, subscribe now, and be part of the community that values truth over speculation. According to publicly discussed information surrounding the investigation, reviewing Nancy's belongings encouraged investigators to revisit documents connected to her life that had previously received little attention. And that's where something unexpected happened. Instead of finding evidence pointing only toward her final weeks, they reportedly began noticing patterns stretching much further back. Patterns, not conclusions. That's an important distinction. Because patterns don't solve investigations. They simply point investigators toward questions they hadn't considered before. One document leads to another. One record references another location. One financial file connects to another. Gradually, a timeline begins to grow. Slowly, a picture begins to emerge. Imagine reading only the final chapter of a novel. You might understand how it ends, but you'd completely miss why the ending happened. You'd miss the character development. You'd miss the relationships. You'd miss the subtle clues that were planted dozens of chapters earlier. That's the challenge investigators often face. They begin with the last chapter, then spend months, or even years, trying to reconstruct everything that came before it. Nancy's case appears to be following that exact pattern, because the more investigators reportedly examined publicly available records connected to her life, the more they realized the timeline might be much longer than anyone first believed. That realization matters, not because it proves what happened, it doesn't, but because it changes the questions investigators ask. Instead of asking, what happened during Nancy's final weeks, They may also need to ask what had been happening during the years before that. Those are two completely different investigations, and the second one is often far more difficult. Because memories fade, records become harder to locate, people move away, businesses close, old documents disappear. The passage of time quietly erases pieces of the past that might otherwise provide answers. This is the moment where most people scroll away. But you're still here, which means you're invested in understanding the full story. If you want to see this investigation through to the end, make sure you're subscribed. You don't want to miss the next update. The next video could be the one that finally breaks this case open. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you're the first to know when new information emerges. Every passing year quietly erases another small piece of the past. That's why investigators place enormous value on documentation. Paper records, financial records, property records, insurance documents, letters, personal notes, calendars, photographs, digital files. Each one captures a single moment in time. Each one preserves something that might otherwise be forgotten. On its own, each document may seem insignificant. Together, they can reveal a pattern no one noticed before. According to publicly available reporting, that's exactly what investigators have reportedly been doing. Not searching for one dramatic breakthrough, but carefully reconstructing Nancy's life piece by piece. And what they reportedly found wasn't a single shocking discovery, it was consistency. The same names appearing across different records, the same locations resurfacing over time, the same financial references, the same properties, the same timeline quietly expanding. That kind of consistency always attracts attention, because coincidences happen once, patterns repeat, and investigators are trained to notice repetition. Think about your own life for a moment. If someone looked through your calendar, your emails, your receipts, and your photographs, they could probably reconstruct your routines with surprising accuracy. Where you usually shop, who you spend time with, which places you visit most often, which habits remain consistent over time. The same principle applies in investigations, except investigators aren't trying to understand your habits. They're trying to determine whether those habits changed. Because sudden changes often tell an important story. Did someone stop visiting certain places? Did financial activity suddenly increase? Did communication patterns shift? Did travel become more frequent? Did someone begin organizing important documents? Did relationships change? Did daily routines become different? Those aren't accusations, they're investigative questions. And they're precisely the kind of questions that investigators have reportedly been asking as they've continued examining Nancy's documented life. This is the kind of work that doesn't happen overnight. It takes weeks of research, fact-checking, and careful analysis. If you want to see more of this kind of thorough investigation, the best way to support it is to subscribe. It costs nothing, it takes 2 seconds, and it tells YouTube that this kind of content matters to real people. Subscribe now and be part of the community that values truth over rumors. Area receiving particular attention involves documentation connected to her finances and property history. Why? Because records rarely rely on memory. People may forget conversations. They may misremember dates. They may confuse one event with another. Documents don't do any of that. A property record created years ago remains exactly the same today. An insurance policy preserves dates with precision. A bank statement preserves transactions. A tax document preserves ownership history. Together, those records create something investigators value enormously, a chronology, not what people remember, but what can actually be verified. And verification matters, especially in a case surrounded by rumors, online theories, and constant speculation. Every week seems to bring another claim, another supposed witness, another anonymous source, another theory promising to solve everything. Most don't survive careful examination. That's why investigators continue returning to documents. Documents don't become emotional. They don't exaggerate. They don't seek attention. They simply exist. And that existence makes them invaluable in an investigation where so much else remains uncertain. If you're enjoying this breakdown and want to be part of the community that values facts over rumors, subscribe now. It's free. It helps the channel grow. And it ensures you won't miss the next piece of this puzzle. The next video could be the one that changes everything. Don't miss it. Subscribe and turn on notifications today. Nancy appears to have understood the importance of documentation herself. According to publicly discussed information, she kept records that investigators have continued reviewing as they work to better understand her final months and potentially the years leading up to them. That possibility has raised an entirely new question. Was Nancy simply keeping ordinary personal records, or was she intentionally preserving information she believed might one day matter? Right now, there isn't a public answer, but investigators reportedly continue examining that possibility carefully. Because if someone spends years quietly preserving information, the obvious question becomes, why? What motivated her to keep these records? Was she preparing for something? Was she protecting herself? Was she documenting a situation she believed might escalate? Was she creating a paper trail for reasons no one yet understands? Those are the questions investigators are reportedly trying to answer, and each question leads to more questions. That's how investigations work. One answer reveals another question. One document leads to another document. One discovery opens a door to something else entirely. That's where this investigation becomes deeply personal, because regardless of how this story ultimately ends, every document Nancy chose to keep represents a decision she made, a moment she considered worth preserving, a memory she believed shouldn't disappear, a piece of information she thought might matter someday. And sometimes, those small decisions become the very things that help investigators understand someone's life after they're gone. The records she kept may hold the key to understanding what happened to her. As investigators reportedly continue piecing together Nancy's timeline, one thing has become increasingly clear. This isn't simply an investigation into what happened, it's also an investigation into who Nancy really was. Not the headlines, not the online theories, not the rumors, the real person, her routines, her decisions, her relationships, her priorities, her fears, her hopes. The life she lived when no one was watching, because somewhere inside that larger picture, investigators hope they'll finally understand whether the answers they've been searching for have been hiding in plain sight all along. This is the point where most people click away, but you're still here. That means this story matters to you. If you want to stay updated on every development in this investigation, make sure you're subscribed. The next video could be the one that changes everything. Don't risk missing it. Subscribe now and turn on notifications. One of the biggest mistakes people make when following a major investigation is assuming the most important event happened at the very end. It's an understandable assumption. When someone disappears, our attention naturally focuses on the final phone call, the last known sighting, the last place they were seen alive. Those moments are undeniably important. But experienced investigators know something the public often overlooks. The final chapter rarely explains the entire story. Instead, it reflects everything that came before it. It's the culmination of a much longer narrative. That's why timelines matter, not because they provide immediate answers, but because they reveal patterns that are almost impossible to see when looking at isolated events. Imagine dumping 10,000 puzzle pieces onto a table. Looking at one piece tells you almost nothing, but as more pieces begin fitting together, a picture slowly starts to emerge. Investigations work much the same way. Every verified phone record, every financial transaction, every documented appointment, every confirmed conversation adds another piece to the puzzle. None of those pieces solve the mystery on their own, but together they can begin revealing a story no one recognized at first. That's why investigators often revisit the same documents repeatedly, not because the documents have changed, because the context has. Information that seemed ordinary months earlier may suddenly become significant once new facts emerge. A receipt that looked routine, a calendar entry that seemed innocuous, a property record that appeared unremarkable, an insurance document that seemed straightforward. Individually, they may appear meaningless. Collectively, they can reshape an investigation. According to publicly available reporting, investigators have continued reviewing multiple aspects of Nancy's documented life, including financial records, communications, and other materials relevant to establishing an accurate timeline. That process isn't unusual. In fact, it's considered standard investigative practice, because investigators don't simply ask what happened, they also ask, when did things begin to change? That question is surprisingly difficult to answer. People rarely wake up one morning with their entire lives transformed. If you're still watching, you're clearly someone who cares about getting the full story. Don't miss what comes next. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you're the first to know when we break new ground in this investigation. Your subscription helps ensure that careful, thorough research continues to reach people who genuinely care about understanding the truth. More often, changes happen gradually. Relationships evolve, financial situations shift, daily routines become different, new concerns emerge, old habits disappear. Each change may seem insignificant, until someone places them all in chronological order. Then the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. That's exactly why investigators spend enormous amounts of time building comprehensive timelines, not just days, sometimes years, because the farther back they look, the greater the opportunity to identify when something first started changing. Think about your own life. If someone examined only your activities from last Tuesday, they'd know almost nothing about you. But if they looked at several years of documented routines, travel, communication, financial activity, major decisions, they'd begin understanding how your life evolved over time. They'd see patterns. They'd notice changes. They'd identify moments when things shifted. The same principle applies here. Understanding Nancy's story requires more than examining her final weeks. It requires understanding the larger context surrounding those weeks. Who was she? How did she live? What mattered to her? What routines remained consistent? Which ones changed? What was she worried about? What was she preparing for? Those questions may sound simple. They're anything but. Because every answer must be supported by evidence. Not assumptions, not internet speculation. Evidence. That's one reason investigators place such importance on documentary records. Unlike memory, documents don't become less accurate because time passes. A bank statement still reflects the same transaction. A property record still lists the same ownership history. A dated photograph still captures the same moment. Those records become anchors, reliable reference points in investigations where memories may conflict or fade. This is the kind of work that doesn't happen overnight. It takes weeks of research, fact-checking, and careful analysis. If you want to see more of this kind of thorough investigation, the best way to support it is to subscribe. It costs nothing. It takes 2 seconds. And it tells YouTube that this kind of content matters to real people. Subscribe now and be part of the community that values truth over speculation. According to publicly discussed information, investigators have continued reviewing a wide range of records connected to Nancy's life in an effort to better understand that broader timeline. The goal isn't simply to identify one dramatic breakthrough, it's to eliminate uncertainty wherever possible. That's a slower process than many people expect. Movies often portray investigations as dramatic breakthroughs happening overnight. Reality is different. Real investigations are built through patience, one verified fact at a time. Sometimes weeks of work produce nothing. Then one document answers a question investigators have been asking for months, not because it contains a dramatic revelation, but because it confirms or disproves a theory. It's easy to forget that behind every document, every timeline, every investigative update, there's a family still living through uncertainty. For them, this isn't simply another story making headlines, it's their daily reality. Every new report brings renewed hope. Every rumor brings renewed anxiety. Every unanswered question becomes another day without closure. That's why investigators carry such enormous responsibility. Their work doesn't simply shape public understanding, it shapes the lives of real people. Nancy Guthrie wasn't just the subject of an investigation. She was someone's mother, someone's friend, someone whose absence continues to leave questions that those closest to her still hope will one day be answered. Beyond every timeline, every document, every piece of evidence, there's a human story, a life, a family, a future interrupted. That's why investigators continue doing the painstaking work of reconstructing Nancy's timeline. Not because every record will produce a dramatic revelation, but because every verified fact brings them one step closer to understanding the larger picture, and every step forward, no matter how small, is a step toward the truth that her family has been waiting for. If you've made it this far, you're clearly someone who cares about getting the full story. Don't miss what comes next. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you're the first to know when we break new ground in this investigation. Your subscription helps ensure that careful, thorough research continues to reach people who genuinely care about understanding the truth. Subscribe now. It costs nothing, it takes 2 seconds, and it makes a real difference. One key, one box, one discovery, and an entire investigation may never be the same again. Every week we uncover real criminal cases with verified reporting, careful research, and respect for the people whose lives were changed forever. If these stories matter to you, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next investigation. We will be following this case until Nancy Guthrie is found. Subscribe and turn on notifications. The next video goes live the moment there is a break in this case. You cannot afford to miss that video. Share this with everyone tracking this case. The more eyes on the evidence, the harder it becomes to stay invisible. We are not stopping, not until she is found. The key is out there, somewhere, and one day someone will finally understand what it opens. Drop a comment right now. Tell us where you are watching from. Tell us what you think the key might open. This community has been ahead of this investigation from the beginning, and your analysis matters. Stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop searching for the truth.